Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a place where sweet dreams and sweet smells do not go hand in hand. Imagine ducking your head to pass through the warped oak door of a cramped 17th century perfume shop, the air instantly wrapping around you like a heavy, invisible cloak. Candles burn low, each one releasing not only light but the oily, sharp perfume it's been steeped in. You take one slow breath and immediately regret it. Rose, jasmine, musk, lavender, and something far less floral elbow their way up your nose and seem to take up residence behind your eyes. It's the kind of air that makes you think, if this is luxury, maybe I'm okay being poor. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in the doorway a moment longer, partly to adjust your eyes to the gloom, partly to see if you can adjust your lungs to this scent onslaught. The floorboards creak under your shoes, uneven, splintery, and vaguely sticky from decades of spills. Shelves sag under the weight of clay jars, glass flacons, and cork-stoppered bottles. Some are labeled in ornate calligraphy, Eau de Rose, Huile de Jasmine, while others bear names you can't pronounce and probably don't want to translate. Your master, a wiry man with a nose that looks like it's been sharpened to a point through sheer olfactory willpower, waves you in. His apron is stained with what might once have been saffron-colored liquid but now looks like the palate of a child who's been let loose with every paint pot. He informs you, without a hint of irony, that you will come to love this air. You're not sure. Love is the right word, maybe endure, if you're lucky. The first task is simple. Breathe and take it all in. That's when you notice something else beneath the flowers and oils, an almost meaty richness that doesn't belong in a bottle. You glance toward the rear of the shop, where a curtained doorway hides the workroom, and you're hit with a wave of warmer, thicker scent, like old honey stirred with smoke and, well, something you'd expect in a butcher's refuse bin. You shuffle forward, passing a display table set with porcelain scent bottles shaped like swans and pineapples. One swan's beak is chipped, a brownish crust clings to the fracture. The air seems to swirl more slowly in here, as if weighted down. Historians still argue whether these early perfume shops genuinely tried to ventilate their rooms or if they believed more trapped air meant richer scents. If this is the richer option, you're not convinced it's worth it. Your master leads you to the counter, where a glass cloche covers a shallow silver tray of crushed rose petals. They are limp, browning at the edges, yet still strong enough to fill the air with sweetness. He lifts the cloche for you to sniff. Big mistake. The petal's perfume punches your sinuses, followed by a sour undercurrent, like fruit left too long in the sun. He smiles knowingly, as if watching you struggle is part of your initiation. In the corner, a small fire flickers under a copper still. The scent of heated oil and something vaguely animal seeps through the room. Your master explains, too casually, that this is the heart of the workshop. Every blend begins here, whether it's bound for a duchess's dressing table or a merchant's ambitious gift to his wife. The irony is, in the 17th century, perfume wasn't just about smelling nice. It was believed to be armor against the world's filth. People thought strong scents could ward off illness, even plague. That means the more intense the smell, the more protected you supposedly were. You're fairly certain no modern doctor would prescribe eau de goat musk as a preventative, but back then? Perfectly logical. You shift your weight, and your shoe sticks slightly to the plank floor. Looking down, you notice a dark stain, glossy in the candlelight, with a little pile of powdered resin stuck to it. No one hurries to clean it. In fact, your master steps right over it. The idea of clean here is more about disguising what's dirty, masking with scent instead of removing it. Your attention is caught by a bell over the door. A customer steps in, bringing a rush of outside air that, though laced with horse manure and chimney smoke, somehow feels fresher than what you've been breathing. She's draped in silks, her hair pinned high, her nose already twitching as she leans over the counter. She asks for something, to outshine the Countess. Your master obliges, reaching for a vial of deep golden liquid, uncorking it with a flourish, and letting the scent billow into the air. You have to fight the urge to take another step back. As she leaves, trailing the perfume behind her like a personal weather system, you realize there's no escaping this environment. Every breath, every blink, every thread of your clothing will carry these smells. Already you feel a faint, pleasant dizziness. Or maybe that's just the first sign of scent-induced fatigue. Either way, you've crossed the threshold. The workshop has you now. Your training begins almost immediately, and it's less about mixing than it is about enduring. The master claims that a good perfumer's first tool is their nose, and like any tool, it must be sharpened. In practice, this means hours of sniffing every raw ingredient in the shop, whether you like it or not. He sets you at a narrow wooden workbench where tiny ceramic dishes are arranged in neat rows. Each dish contains a different substance: dried lavender buds, crushed orange blossom, powdered iris root, something he calls balsam of Peru that looks suspiciously like sticky tar. You're instructed to sniff each one slowly, breathing in through the nose, holding the scent, then exhaling through the mouth. It's meant to help you read the fragrance, but after the fourth or fifth dish, your brain feels like someone's been rearranging the furniture up there. Some scents are delightful, soft, green, and floral. Others? They hit like a punch in the face. One small jar contains a lump of beeswax soaked in oil that smells faintly of honey, but there's an undernote like old socks that's impossible to ignore. Your master beams when you wrinkle your nose, apparently recognizing unpleasant truth, and a fragrance is just as important as detecting beauty. Then there are the animal fats. You're handed a lump of tallow, which smells exactly like tallow, greasy and faintly meaty, with a hint of fireplace smoke. It's not bad so much as it's startling to realize this is a building block of luxury perfume. Fat holds scent, he explains, allowing flower oils to bind and last longer. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of animal fats in perfumery was a matter of necessity, or simply a lack of better fixatives. Either way, you're forced to smell it long enough to taste it in the back of your throat. After a few more rounds, he produces something that looks harmless enough, a brown resinous lump the size of a walnut. This is labdanum, he says, scraped from the beards of goats that graze among rockrose bushes. The goat's fur collects the sticky resin, which is later combed out, or in some cases shaved. You can't decide whether to be impressed by the ingenuity or horrified at the goat's involvement. Either way, it smells rich, sweet, and oddly leathery, like a well-worn saddle that's been dusted with sugar. Between each sniff, you're told to cleanse your nose by smelling a dish of plain wool cloth. This doesn't so much reset your senses as remind you that there are worse things than barnyard floral. At one point, you catch yourself leaning away from the table, trying to breathe the slightly less pungent air above your head. The master notices immediately, and nudges the next dish closer. Your eyes drift to a large glass dome on the shelf behind him. Inside is a heap of dried petals so dark they're almost black. Orris root and violet, he says with a reverent tone. You lean in, inhale, and are hit with a dry, powdery perfume that feels like it belongs in an elderly aunt's dressing table. It's pleasant, but cloying, your brain filing it under smell to avoid during a headache. The hours crawl. The master insists on revisiting scents you've already smelled, asking you to describe them again and again. At one point, you can't tell if you're smelling something new or if the ghosts of previous scents are still clinging to your sinuses. He grins, clearly aware of your confusion, and mutters that a true perfumer can find the rose in a garden of manure. You'd like to point out that you're starting to find manure in the roses. When the light through the front window begins to turn golden, your head feels heavy, your throat dry from breathing only scented air all day. You're handed one final dish, a mixture of ground cinnamon and clove, meant to wake up the nose. The warmth of it is almost shocking after the florals and musks, and for a fleeting moment, you think you could keep going. But then the cinnamon burns just enough to make you sneeze, and the room spins in a dizzy little pirouette. It's only your first day, but you're already beginning to suspect that perfumery in the 17th century isn't about crafting delicate scents so much as surviving them. And as you wipe your nose on your sleeve, you're pretty sure the sleeve now smells like a bizarre blend of goat, tallow, and spiced cake. The next morning, your master decides it's time you meet the darker side of the craft, animal-derived aromatics. These are the prestige notes, he tells you, the rich and lingering scents that give perfume its backbone. The way he says it, you'd think he was introducing you to royalty. First comes musk. He opens a squat earthen jar and peels back a waxed cloth covering. The smell that escapes is dense, warm, and oddly human, like skin after a day in the sun, but amplified tenfold. Your master explains that true musk comes from the dried gland of a male musk deer. The deer are hunted for this purpose, though some merchants swear they only gather from the dead. Historians still argue whether that claim was ever more than marketing fluff. You can't help picturing a hunter with an eye on the animal's scent pouch rather than its meat. Next is civet. A small ceramic pot with a lid shaped like a snarling cat is placed before you. The moment it's opened, you recoil. It's an earthy, fecal tang that sits somewhere between barnyard and wet fur. The source, you're told, is a paste secreted by the perineal glands of civet cats, collected by scraping it off the animals kept in small cages. They're well fed, your master insists, and their contribution is highly valued. You're not sure if the civets would agree. Then there's castoreum, drawn from beaver scent glands. This one is surprisingly leathery and warm, with a sharp edge that reminds you faintly of smoked meat. You think it might actually be pleasant if you didn't know exactly where it came from. Each of these materials, he says, will be diluted and blended so their more repellent aspects melt into complexity. Right now, though, all you can smell is the raw truth. He dips a glass rod into the civet jar and wafts it under your nose again. Your eyes water instantly, the scent lodging somewhere between your sinuses and your will to live. There's a small, almost conspiratorial smile on his face, like this is an important threshold for you as an apprentice. Survive this, and you can survive anything. He launches into a story about how wealthy patrons in Paris once fought over who could secure the most potent musk, claiming it was a symbol of virility. He even leans in to share that some nobles wore small balls of civet-soaked cloth inside their clothes, close to their skin. You can only imagine the miasma at court gatherings. To break up the parade of animal secretions, he lets you smell something brighter, tonka beans, smelling of warm vanilla and almond. The relief is instant, and you almost thank him, until he follows it up with a jar of fresh civet again, reminding you that in the workshop, sweetness and foulness walk hand in hand. By midday, your clothes have absorbed enough scent to register as their own unique blend. You're fairly certain no one else in the city smells exactly like this, a heady cocktail of roses, smoke, deer gland, and civet cat. And the strangest part? Somewhere in the constant bombardment, your nose starts to dull. You begin to think you could get used to it, until a draft from the open door stirs the air, mixing all the smells into a brand new cloud of confusion. A wealthy patron enters, asking for a masculine, sent for a winter wedding. Your master plucks up a vial of ambergris-infused oil. He explains to you in a hushed aside that ambergris comes from the digestive tract of sperm whales, often found floating in the sea or washed up on beaches. The patron smiles, clearly pleased with his rare prize, and you realize how much of perfumery in this century is about convincing people that these strange origins are marks of distinction rather than reasons to gag. As the customer leaves, the workshop settles back into its dense, fragrant haze. You glance at the jars of musk, civet, and castoreum, wondering which per creature's contribution you'll be working with tomorrow. And as you wipe a bead of sweat from your brow, you realize the smell on your hands isn't going anywhere anytime soon. By the third day, you've stopped hoping for a gentle start. Your master leads you through the curtained doorway into the workshop's back room, a narrow space where the heat clings to you like wet linen and the air feels almost chewable. Here is where the perfume's heart is forged, he says, in a process equal parts art and hazard. 2 copper stills squat over brick hearths, their long swan-necked pipes curling into coiled tubing that disappears into clay jars. A fire crackles underneath, and you can feel its warmth on your shins. The first still holds a bubbling mixture of rose petals and water. It should smell like a garden in June, but the heat has thickened it into something more like a floral stew. The second still is far more ominous. Your master calls it the animal blend, and from the rich, smoky meaty tang seeping from it, you can guess why. Your job is to keep the temperature steady by adding small logs to the fire. He warns you that too much heat will scorch the botanicals, ruining the distillation, while too little will stall the process entirely. You crouch to feed the fire, the rising steam curling up to cling to your face, leaving your skin slick with perfumed condensation. It's like breathing through a scented wet cloth. Overhead, a wooden rack holds bundles of dried herbs, lavender, rosemary, marjoram. Some are bound in twine, others hang loose, their brittle leaves raining down specks of green dust. As you stir the fire, a bit of rosemary falls into the rose still, and your master doesn't seem to mind. In fact, he says accidents like that can sometimes produce the most interesting blends. Historians still argue whether 17th century perfumes were the result of precise recipes or happy mishaps. Your nose suggests a bit of both. After an hour, your head starts to pound from the mix of heat and scent. The steam carries volatile oils into the air, and every breath pulls them deeper into your lungs. You're given a task: transfer the distilled liquid from the clay jars into a waiting glass carboy. The jar is warm to the touch, the liquid inside cloudy and glistening. You pour slowly, careful not to spill, but the vapor that escapes is like a punch of concentrated perfume straight up your nose. Next comes maceration. Your master hands you a shallow copper basin filled with pale animal fat, soft as butter left in the sun. Into this you must stir handfuls of jasmine petals, pressing them down so the fat absorbs their scent over hours, or days. The smell is lush, heady, and slightly sour from the fat itself. Your fingers glisten with oil, and no amount of wiping on your apron seems to remove it. As you work, the sounds of the street drift in through a small high window: hoofbeats, a street vendor shouting about apples, the clank of a distant bell. It's a reminder that the world outside smells entirely different, though whether it's any fresher is up for debate. Halfway through the day, the animal blend still lets out a sudden burp of steam, sending a fresh wave of musk and civet into the room. You cough, eyes watering, while your master chuckles. "You'll grow fond of that," he says. "You are absolutely certain you will not." By late afternoon, the air is so thick with scent it feels heavy in your lungs. You've sweat through your shirt, your hair clings to your temples, and the skin on your hands has taken on a faint golden sheen from the oils. When you finally step back into the front room, the shift in air is so pronounced you almost shiver. The shop's heavy, cloying perfume haze now feels like relief compared to the back room's boiling fog. Your master pats your shoulder, leaving an oily print on your sleeve. "Not bad for your first time at the still," he says. But you catch the way he watches you as you steady yourself against the counter, half amused, half curious to see whether you'll faint. You won't give him the satisfaction, but you're already imagining how badly you're going to smell when you crawl into bed tonight. You return the next morning still feeling faint traces of yesterday's heat and musk clinging to your skin, as if the workshop had followed you home in your pores. Today, though, the master has a different lesson, one that starts with the charmingly named "Brought Beneath the Roses." On the counter sits a wicker basket overflowing with fresh blooms, damask roses, tuberose, orange blossoms. At first glance, it's the prettiest thing you've seen in days. But when you lean closer, you catch the undertones, sweetness curling into sour, petals starting to go limp at the edges, a faint brown stain creeping up the stems. These aren't the peak-of-season flowers you might imagine for perfume. No, these are the ones just past their prime, sold cheaper by the market's florists, and destined for the still before anyone notices. Your master insists this is not waste, it's economy. The logic goes that as petals age, their scent deepens, and the oils become easier to coax out. Historians still argue whether this was science, or simply thrift disguised as craft. Either way, you're tasked with separating petals from stems, discarding only those that have gone completely black with mold. The rest, soft, bruised, sometimes with tiny insect hitchhikers, are fair game. The work is oddly hypnotic: pinch, twist, drop. The petals pile up in a copper basin, their scent swelling as the heat of your hands bruises them further. But the sweetness is mingled with a faintly vinegary tang, the kind that makes you breathe through your mouth without realizing it. You try not to imagine the end customer dabbing this on their neck, unaware that part of the magic began in the early stages of rot. Occasionally, the master stops by to toss in a handful of something else: dried marigold, crushed cloves, a spoonful of syrupy resin, layering scent upon scent. He claims that imperfections in the flowers are masked, even elevated, by the addition of strong companions. You're not so sure. Elevated is the right word when you watch a petal with a tiny brown spot vanish into the mix. The basin, once full, is carried to the back room where yesterday's stills sit cooling. Today, you're using an enfleurage frame, wooden trays coated with animal fat, into which the petals are pressed flat, forming a fragrant mosaic. Over days, the fat will drink in their scent, and the limp petals will be scraped away and replaced with fresh ones until the fat is saturated. You're warned not to let the petals sit too long in one place, or the growing rot will taint the fat itself. Midway through the morning, you're struck by the irony. 17th century perfume was often a battle between decay and beauty, with both sitting in the same tray. The air is thick with contradictions, floral highs and earthy lows, sweetness laced with something just shy of unpleasant. A customer enters while you're at the frame, wrinkling his nose slightly at the scent in the air. He asks for a rose perfume, but something bold enough to cover the smell of the stables. Your master assures him the current blend will chase even the strongest horse away, and you can't help thinking it might also chase away the horse's owner. By the afternoon, the workshop smells like an overripe garden. You can almost see the scent hanging in the air, a golden haze that catches the light from the window. Your fingertips are stained pale green from the stems, and the skin on your hands feels faintly sticky from plant sap. Somewhere deep in the mix of smells, you think you detect yesterday's musk still lingering, stubborn and uninvited. When you finally step outside to fetch a bucket of water, the city's own bouquet greets you: manure, smoke, damp stone. It's not exactly pleasant, but after a morning of sweet rot, it almost feels like a cleanse. You fill the bucket slowly, enjoying the faint metallic tang of the pump's water before carrying it back in, ready to drown the flowers in one last rinse before they meet the fat. By the end of the day, you've learned that in this trade, beauty often comes from the edge of spoilage. And sometimes, the only thing separating perfume from compost is a copper tray and a perfumer's stubborn belief in transformation. By the time the bells finish their morning grumble, the shop's door has already opened 3 times and each visitor carries a small weather system of status. You can tell who funds the city's decisions by the way they move through the air, as if the streets stink parts for them out of respect. It does not. In fact, when the latest carriage rattles away, it leaves behind a ribbon of manure fumes so bold you could lean a ladder on it. And that's precisely why your master rubs his hands together and whispers, "Today, we mix to conquer the city." Conquer is a strong word for something kept in a glass flagon, but here in the 17th century, Smell is politics you can't ignore. You learn on your first day that people believe strong fragrance can protect against foul, disease-bearing miasmas, those invisible clouds of bad air that supposedly carry illness. The richer the scent, the thicker your supposed armor. A duchess isn't just buying flowers and oil, she's buying a shield. You, unfortunately, are the blacksmith whose forge is also his lungs. Your nose files a formal complaint, which your master stamps, denied, with a grin. The first visitor, silk like water, shoes that never learn to scuff, leans on the counter and asks for something that tramples street odor under a velvet slipper. Your master reveals a vial of syrupy golden ambergris tincture, swirls of whale legend catching the light. By now you know the pitch, found at sea, aged by sun and salt, rare as a kindly tax collector. The patron nods slowly, the way people do when they plan to outscent their enemies. Politics, but wearable. When they leave, your master beckons you closer and taps a ledger. Columns of names march across the page, counselors, magistrates, widows with surprising incomes, and beside them, notations of blend strength. They want weight, he says. The city grows, the gutters swell, the tanneries ripen by noon. If your perfume can't outbox a cow yard, it isn't perfume. You imagine a boxing ring in your sinuses and wonder if the cow would at least fight fair. You grind resins, frankincense that smolders like a church corner and myrrh that sulks pleasantly in the pestle. A pinch of clove, a whisper of cinnamon, a sigh of rose absolute from yesterday's rot-bordered petals. Then, the expensive push, musk and a spoon's edge of civet, both diluted, both still brazen, both the kind of notes that make the air feel like it has elbows. Let it sit, your master says. Then we'll make it louder. You did not think louder was an option. A boy in livery arrives next, bearing a folded note sealed with enough wax to make a candle jealous. The message states, with admirable brevity, that a certain noble household requires the strength of 3 markets and a church in high summer. You glance out at the lane where fishmongers, tallow makers, and a horse negotiating with its breakfast provide the base notes of city life. You get the idea? Your master ties on a fresh apron, the old one now a color chart for spilled vanity, and sets you to warming a pot of scented fat for infused gloves. Scented gloves are the rage this decade, leather tanned fiercely, then softened with balm steeped in flowers, spice, and the occasional moral dilemma. Here's your mainstream fact for the day, delivered between one stir and the next. In Paris, the glove makers and perfumers joined forces under royal letters patent in 1656, becoming the corporation des Parfumeurs. The king granted them the right to scent materials, gloves, fans, girdles, even wigs, a monopoly that smells suspiciously like power. Your master loves repeating this as if he personally shook the king's hand. You suspect he'd settle for perfuming it. As the glove bomb warms, the shop fills with clients who speak in adjectives. Heavy, imperial, ruinous. One wants a blend that announces him before he arrives, another wants a fragrance that lingers after I have left, like a rumor with good posture. You keep your face calm, your hands steady, and your inner jester on a leash. Still, when one patron requests the strongest rose God allows, your mouth almost asks if God signed our ledger. You swallow it. Sleepy as our voice on, sarcasm at a gentle simmer. This city adds its own commentary. A gust under the door drags and tanners stink bright as brass, and the horses vote loudly against everything. You watch your master lean toward the draft, sniff, and make a tiny adjustment to a formula. 2 extra drops of labdanum for body, 1 of bergamot to lift. You learned yesterday that too much lift just means your neighbors can smell your wallet from farther away. He swears rival shops season the street with cheap colognes at midday to muddle noses and lure patrons. Historians still argue whether this was petty warfare or apothecary folklore, but your master arms you with cedar shavings near the door to cut through their fog. You keep the little box like a pocket knife for the air. Between customers, a woman with ink-stained fingers and a lined face, the kind who handles other people's money, asks for a discreet pomander. You help fill a pierced silver ball with clove-studded orange, a shred of angelica root, and a crumb of ambergris no bigger than a lentil. She tucks it into her bodice the way a sailor ties a knot, twice, without looking. She explains, not unkindly, that meetings are held by windows and drains, and a lady's patience is not infinite. You picture her at a council table, the pomander like a tiny planet of sanity. Fringe tidbit: you've heard of perfumers who scent prayer books, dotting the leather with herb oils so worship smells like a clean hillside. You resist the urge to ask if the choir sings better after bergamot. That request for scented gloves turns into a campaign. Warm balm meets leather. You work it in with the heel of your hands until the gloves drink, soften, and begin to exhale a hush of spice and flower. When you're done, your own palms smell like a well-traveled trunk. The noble household's messenger returns, sniffs, and smiles so slightly it could be a yawn. Payment arrives in the form of a small purse and a larger favor. Your master is promised consideration when the guild revises its shop quotas. Politics again, wrapped in ribbon. Afternoon slides toward evening, and the lane outside fattens with clatter. A rival perfumer strolls past, trailing a heliotrope sweetness that ducks straight under your door like a gossiping ferret. Your master mutters something unprintable but musical and raps the counter. "More base on batch 7, he says. "The winter wedding." You lift the musk solution, dilute further, then add a plume of tobacco tincture, warm, leathery, the smell of chairs that knows secrets. In your head, you rate it 3 horses, 1 tanner, and a silent church. The joke lands in your own chest, which, to be fair, is now part chest and part storage jar. A final patron appears, a young man with excellent hair and the nervousness of someone about to propose. He wants a scent. She will not forget. Your master chooses gentler notes, narrowly, a breath of vanilla, a velvet of iris, and you watch relief calm the room. Not every request tonight is a battle standard. The young man leaves with a vial like a promise, and the firm advice not to pour it like wine. You imagine him disobeying immediately. Closing takes longer than it should because the day refuses to let go. The shop smells triumphant and exhausted, like a parade with sore feet. You wedge the door for a final draft of outside air and decide the city's odor is not a single monster but an orchestra of small, unwashed instruments. You lean in the doorway, eyes half closed, listening to it. There's your third joke, quiet as a wink. Somewhere out there, a horse sneezes, and you have the absurd urge to offer it a scented handkerchief. As you snuff the candles, you think about power you can't quite see, the kind that wafts ahead of a person, insists on a seat, denies, persuades, conceals. Perfume hears persuasion you dab behind the ears. Historians still argue whether the infamous perfumed courtiers actually bathed less and masked it with fragrance, or whether that's just slander by enemies who lost the scent war. What you know, with intimate certainty, is that your own nose is collateral. It hums dully inside your skull like a struck bell, your senses bruised but obedient. You hang your apron by the hearth, hands shining faintly in the low light, and step out into the street. The air is cooler, bigger, but the workshop walks with you anyway, a cloak stitched from rose, smoke, civet, and a promise that tomorrow the city will still need conquering, drop by fragrant drop. You arrive the next day expecting more grinding, boiling, and inhaling, but instead the master greets you with a grin that can only mean trouble. "Time for the apprentice's real test," he says, handing you a long wooden paddle that looks like it should stir laundry in a washtub. He leads you into the back room, where a row of squat copper vats glisten in the candlelight. Steam coils lazily above them, each one exhaling a different mix of floral, spice, and something else entirely. He gestures to the farthest vat. "Ambergris and urine," he says without flinching. You blink at him, waiting for the joke, but there is none. In the 17th century, this isn't a prank, it's a legitimate step in certain perfume preparations. The urine, sometimes human, sometimes animal, is used to break down resins and musk, helping to fix the scent so it lasts longer. Historians still argue whether this was truly effective chemistry or just a traditional quirk no one dared question. Either way, you're the one holding the paddle. The smell is indescribable. Imagine a beach at low tide, layered with warm leather, overlaid with something faintly acrid that stings the nose and eyes. The ambergris is a rare and valuable fixative, the urine an unglamorous catalyst. Together they create a scent that somehow manages to be both luxurious and alarming. You step up to the vat, grip the paddle, and begin stirring in slow, steady circles. The surface ripples, releasing fresh waves of complexity, if we're being generous, with each turn. Nearby, another vat holds a thick paste of civet musk and rose oil, already darkening into a glossy brown. The veteran perfumer, thin, sharp-eyed, and perpetually smelling of labdanum, saunters over and dips a copper spoon into the civet mixture. He lets you sniff, and you instantly wish you hadn't. "Rich, isn't it?" he says with the same tone someone might use to compliment a fine wine. You mutter something noncommittal and return to your paddle, silently hoping your nose never fully recovers enough to smell this vividly again. The hazing isn't just olfactory, it's physical. Stirring a vat of semi-liquid fat and resin is hard work, and the heat from the hearth makes your arms slick with sweat. At one point, a bubble bursts near your knuckles, spattering a dot of the mixture onto your skin. You wipe it off quickly, but the scent clings, stubborn and insistent, as if it's claimed you as part of the batch. One of the older apprentices sidles up to offer advice. It's clearly part of the game. He suggests adding a dash of vinegar to brighten the mix. You glance at the master, who says nothing, his lips twitching. You resist the bait, continuing with the steady rhythm he'd instructed. Later you'll learn that vinegar would curdle the fat and ruin the batch, a mistake they'd have happily let you own. By midday, your head feels stuffed with warm cloth. The veterans are humming a tune you don't recognize, punctuated by the clink of glass bottles and the occasional slosh of liquid into flacons. Someone in the corner is polishing perfume funnels with alcohol, a luxury in itself. Another is filtering rose oil through fine linen, the liquid dripping into a crystal-clear pool that looks deceptively drinkable. The master wanders past and tips a pinch of powdered spice into your vat. "For balance," he says. It's cinnamon, the sweet warmth lifting the scent for just a moment before the heavier bass notes settle back and like stubborn house guests. He tells you that high-born customers sometimes request perfumes so potent they cling to fabric for weeks, partly as a status symbol, partly because laundering is rare enough to make lasting a feature. You can't help but think of the poorer servants who have to live with these garments afterward. The afternoon brings a new challenge, transferring your mixture into a large earthen jar for aging. The contents are warm and sluggish, oozing down the paddle into the funnel. You catch whiffs of every stage, sharp, sweet, earthy, and faintly ammonia, like a timeline of its own making. Once sealed, the jar will sit for weeks, the scents knitting themselves together into something, hopefully, wearable. Or at least sellable. As you wipe down your workbench, one of the veterans passes by and mutters, "You'll smell it in your sleep." He's not wrong. Even now, the air around you feels permanently altered, as though the workshop has woven itself into your very skin. By closing time, you've learned two important truths. First, that finest blends, in this century, often have origins you'd never put on a label. And second, that hazing here isn't just about testing your skill. It's about seeing if you can breathe through the worst the job has to offer and still show up tomorrow. Judging by the grin on the master's face as he snuffs the last candle, you've passed, though your nose might disagree. The morning begins with an announcement from your master that sounds, at first, like a blessing. "Today we talk about perfume and health." You think maybe you're finally getting a break from boiling fat and stirring dubious mixtures. But then he adds, "You'll see why our craft is essential in plague season." Ah. So this isn't about rest, it's about another layer of myth and marketing. In the 17th century, people firmly believed that foul air, miasma, was the main cause of illness. If you could surround yourself with stronger, pleasant air, you could keep the sickness away. Perfume, then, wasn't just vanity, it was armor. Rich patrons paid obscene amounts for fragrances strong enough to mask the city's constant reek. You're told that during outbreaks, the wealthy would soak handkerchiefs in scented vinegar or wear pomanders, little metal spheres filled with clove, cinnamon, ambergris, and other ingredients, to filter the air they breathed. Your master produces one such pomander from a drawer. It's silver, filigreed, and warm from being held in his palm. When he opens it, the scent leaps out, spicy, resinous, almost medicinal. You can see how someone might believe it could fight disease, or at least make the sickroom more bearable. The mainstream fact here, during plague years, even doctors wore heavily scented masks, believing the aromas protected them. But for every comforting belief, there's a darker rumor. One of the older apprentices pipes up with the tale of a perfumer who fainted after inhaling too much musk while leaning over a still. Some say, he adds with mock gravity, too much perfume can weaken the heart. The master rolls his eyes, but doesn't entirely dismiss it. Historians still argue whether fainting spells from heavy scent were common enough to be a real hazard or just gossip designed to make perfumers seem mysterious and dangerous. You're given a task: blend a protective scent for a merchant's wife who won't leave her house without it. The base is vinegar steeped with rosemary, thyme, and lavender, herbs with reputations for keeping the plague at bay. Into that, you add orange peel for brightness and a whisper of myrrh for depth. It smells sharp and clean, and you almost wish you had a bottle for yourself, until your master tops it off with a dash of civet. You're back to reality. While the mixture steeps, you help pack sachets for a noble household, little squares of fabric filled with dried herbs and sewn shut, meant to be tucked into clothing or hung in rooms. You use lavender, mint, and crushed juniper berries. Your fingertips turn faintly green from the mint, and the lavender dust makes you sneeze. One sneeze in this era is enough to make people glance at you with suspicion. You quickly reassure your coworkers it's the good kind of sneeze. A fringe tidbit slips in as you work. In some households, scented oils weren't just worn on the body. They were rubbed into door frames and bedposts as a ward. One of the apprentices swears his aunt dabs rose oil on her front gate to keep away debt collectors. You don't know if it works, but you admire the creativity. By midday, the merchant's wife arrives in person to collect her plague shield. She's draped in so many layers of fabric you wonder how any air reaches her at all. She tests the blend by dabbing it onto her gloves, inhaling deeply. Her face relaxes, and she presses a small coin purse into your master's hand. You catch a whiff as she leaves. It's like a portable herb garden with a faint animal whisper trailing behind. Later, a quieter moment finds you leaning against the counter, the shop's front door cracked for air. Outside, a cart rattles past, the driver wearing a sprig of rosemary tied to his hat. Even in the streets, people cling to these little rituals of protection. You start to realize that your work here is as much about giving people comfort as it is about selling a scent. Whether it truly keeps illness away, well, historians may argue about that forever. As the sun sets, your master closes the shutters and tucks the silver pomander back into its drawer. The shop smells sharper tonight, less floral, more herb and spice, like it's bracing for something. You wonder, just for a moment, if you might sleep a little easier carrying a sachet of rosemary yourself. You barely have time to hang up your coat before your master claps his hands and declares, "Today we work for the extravagant ones." He doesn't have to explain. Every workshop has them. the clients who want scents so dense they could survive a week-long banquet in a smoky hall and still announce themselves from the far end of the table. Your master hauls out a locked chest from beneath the counter. Inside are bottles of the workshop's most concentrated tinctures, ambergris aged to a deep honey glow, real musk and alcohol the color of old tea, labdanum so thick it creeps. Beside them sit smaller vials labeled in a careful hand, bergamot, neroli, styrax, benzoin. These are the trumpets and drums in your little orchestra. Today the quiet flutes can stay in their cases. A footman arrives with a list so long it needs its own ribbon. The household requests a winter scent for gowns, another for gloves, another for the bed hangings. You blink at that, and a masculine cloud, for the master's wig. You mutter that the wig already has a cloud. Your master coughs into his sleeve to hide a smile and points you toward the scale. You set weights the size of thimbles on one pan and begin measuring drops on the other, the air thickening with each careful tilt of the pipette. The first blend is intended for brocade, a fabric that drinks perfume, then hoards it like a dragon. You build the base, ambergris for radiance and longevity, labdanum for body, a ribbon of musk for warmth. Over that you lift a sweet citrus, bergamot and a shy whisper of bitter orange, and finally a resin that smells like a chapel corner after midnight. Your master nods. They want a scent that outlasts the party and a hangover, he says. You aim for something that can outlast the calendar page. Mainstream fact break, delivered with your best sleepy host cadence by the mid-17th century. Perfumes were often worn on clothing even more than on skin. Laundering heavy garments was rare and risky. Scenting the fabric or lining with pomades and tinctures kept one's presentation fresh for weeks. Gloves were famously perfumed. Paris's glove perfumers became a royalized guild, and people scented not just cuffs but fans, wigs, and pocket handkerchiefs. If a garment could whisper, it probably whispered civet. You move to the glove blend. Because leather grips scent differently than silk, you deepen the base. More benzoin, round, vanillic, a bolt of clove to cut through tannery ghosts, a curl of rosemary to keep it breathing. When you finish kneading the balm in, the gloves exhale with authority. You slip one on. It's like putting your hand into a small, polite thunderstorm. Clients arrive in little waves, each with demands that sound like opera arias. One woman wants a perfume that makes conversation lean toward me. Another, wearing pearls the size of confessions, asks for a trail you can find me by tomorrow. You test blotters, you fan the air, you count drops as if counting slow seconds. A fashionable gentleman requests something for worthy. So you build a winter accord, tobacco leaf, cedar shavings, a brush of juniper, the faintest lick of animal warmth, then spike the top with a brisk pinch of lemon so it doesn't smother the room like a heavy cloak. He inhales, smiles, and states gravely that he will wear it to settle an argument. You decide not to ask what kind. Quirky tidbit slips in while you wait for the alcohol to marry with the resins. One of the porters swears a patron once released perfumed pigeons at a garden supper so the air would carry a floral breeze. He claims the birds were dusted with powdered iris and orange blossom. Your master calls it nonsense, but not before asking what the powder did to the table linens. You picture the guests blinking politely while birds trail fragrance like wayward pomaders. As the day swells, so does the excess. You prepare sachets to be sewn into hem facings. You dot ribbon with tincture so a gown's neckline will murmur narrowly. You decant a blend meant solely for the inner band of a wig, where heat will coax it into life. Historians still argue whether elites truly stank beneath all this, poor bathing, heavy costumes, crowded rooms, and used perfume as a mask, or whether the fashion for strength was simply a taste for drama. Either way, the result is the same. Everyone wants their scent to outlast their enemy's gossip. Midway through, a minor crisis. A masculine cloud, turns sullen, too much labdanum, a growl instead of a purr. Your master has you lift it with a late addition of lavender spike and a shy blade of mint. The blend stands up straight. You relax your shoulders and make a note to trust the mint when tempers get leathery, useful in and out of perfumery. For your 3 jokes quota, you quietly tally them. 1. Promising to scent a bed canopy strong enough to keep nightmares filing complaints. 2. Suggesting the wig blend be labeled courage for meetings. 3. Advising that if the perfumed gown starts its own conversation, the wearer should let it finish. The room chuckles, the kind that says you're allowed to keep your place at the bench. Outside, the world does its usual duet of gutter and chimney, but in here the workshop becomes an amphitheater of layered notes. You learn how a drop changes character when it lands in fat rather than alcohol, how silk likes light, high notes that flutter off the warped threads, while wool needs a heavier hand. You watch your master test the blend on paper, then fabric, then the air itself, as if the room were a third collaborator. He insists that perfumes intended for clothing must be judged at a distance, where they'll actually live. You step back, close your eyes, and listen with your nose. A courier from a theatrical troupe barges in, hat at a jaunty emergency angle. The company requests a heroic scent for the lead actor's cloak. Apparently the villain's perfume is stealing scenes from the balcony. You build a bright, martial opening, lemon peel, rosemary, a pinch of crushed bay, then ground it with cedar and a modest animal warmth. The courier bows so low he nearly oils the floor with his forehead. You imagine the duel, swordplay, applause, and a fragrance that leaps across the footlights like a final line. Late afternoon, you decant the brocade blend into a dozen flacons. Heat from your fingers goes through the glass. The room smells of citrus crowns riding on resin shoulders. You label each bottle in looping script and tie thin cords around the necks for easy sewing into linings. A seamstress from the big house arrives to collect them, palms bright with needle marks. She confides that if the scent lasts 2 weeks, the household calls it a triumph. 3. And they commission poetry about it. You suggest 4 and she laughs, a tired, delighted sound, like someone finding an extra candle in a drawer. As shutters go up and wicks get pinched, your own clothes feel heavier, as if soaked in the day's orchestra. The workshop's air has the sheen of a finished painting, nothing loud alone, everything insistent together. You think of Section 5's bruised petals and Section 7's unsayable vats, and how all of it, rot and ritual, whale legend and goat beard, has been bent toward one purpose, a smell that lingers. You step outside to close the bar on the door, and the evening's cold slaps your cheeks awake. Even out here, the brocade blend follows you a pace or two, then settles on your sleeve like a satisfied cat. You realize the extravagant ones will sleep tonight in rooms that carry your work, waking tomorrow wrapped in yesterday's decisions. It's power of a peculiar kind, soft, stubborn, and patient. If politics happens in whispers, perfume is very fluent. The morning begins with a sour note, literally. You arrive to find your master frowning at a row of stoppered bottles, each one holding liquid that looks fine but smells wrong. Perfume may be built to last, but in the 17th century, without refrigeration or airtight seals, it can turn on you like milk left in the sun. This is the day you learn the workshop's least glamorous task, rescuing spoiled batches. The first offender is a once bright citrus blend now smelling faintly like wet hay. The bergamot has collapsed, the orange peel has gone limp, and something in the base has soured. Your master unstoppers it, and waves a hand over the neck like he's testing a loaf of bread. 2 weeks ago, perfect, he mutters. And now. He doesn't finish the sentence, but the way he corks it again says enough. Your job is to separate the salvageable from the unsalvageable. The salvageable ones get adjusted, which is a polite way of saying masked. You start by filtering the liquids through fine linen, watching the oils and alcohol swirl together like quarreling neighbors. For some blends, you add fresh top notes, lemon, lavender, or mint, to distract from the decay. Others need a full base reinforcement, thicker resins, heavier spices, musk in doses you wouldn't dare try on a good day. The goal isn't to restore perfection, It's to make something sellable before the whole batch is fit only for scenting gloves no one will wear in public. The worst batch of the day is a floral meant for a noblewoman's dressing table. The original notes, rose, violet, and orris, have curdled into a powdery sour haze. Your master suspects the rose oil went in too fresh, still holding traces of water, which over time invited the tiniest bit of mold. It's invisible in the bottle but unmistakable in the nose. You sneeze twice and decide you'll never again think of flowers as harmless. Historians still argue whether these spoilages were common in elite perfumery, or more a hazard for merchants working with cheaper stock. Your nose votes for. Everyone suffers sometimes. While you work, the street outside sends in its own commentary. A gust of smoke from the baker's oven, horse dung in the gutter, the metallic tang of rain on cobblestones. Compared to the spoiled perfume in your hands, the city's air almost feels refreshing, until you catch the faint civet tang lingering from yesterday's extravagant blends. The workshop is like a sponge. It soaks everything and gives it back when you least want it. To lighten the air, your master burns a handful of dried rosemary and juniper on a little brazier, the smoke curling into the rafters. It smells sharp, green, and faintly medicinal, better than the sour fug from the faulty bottles. He swears it. Clears the nose, though whether it's science or superstition is anyone's guess. Fringe tidbit. You've heard of apothecaries recommending people burn laurel leaves to drive away bad air. One apprentice says his uncle does it every spring and swears it keeps the rats from gnawing his boots. You suspect the rats just have better taste. Some rescues are more creative. A batch of fading lavender is revived with a dose of rosemary and thyme, turning it from field in decline to herbal tonic. Another bottle, once a light jasmine water, is too far gone to drink in fresh flowers. Instead, you boil it with clove and cinnamon to create a heavy winter scent. It won't please the lady who ordered the jasmine, but someone else will love it. Perfume here is often about the right nose finding the right bottle, sometimes by accident. By midday, the salvage bench is a battlefield of funnels, cloths, and half-measured hopes. You've handled so much spoiled rose that you think you can smell it even when your hands are in clean water. Your master comes by with a grin, holding up a rescued vial. "This one will live," he says, tucking it into the good stock. You can't help but feel a little relief, as if you just pulled a half-drowned kitten out of a barrel. Of course, not everything survives. The truly ruined bottles are poured into a large ceramic jug in the corner, destined for functional uses, scenting shoe leather, mixing into cleaning water for the floor, or dabbing onto cloths to keep moths from eating stored garments. The master once claimed he used a bad batch to clean ink off his desk. You're not sure if that was ingenuity or revenge on the bottle. As the day winds down, the air has shifted. The herbal smoke has mingled with the brighter rescues, and the spoiled notes have been bullied into submission. Your clothes, however, are another story. They smell like a shelf of potpourri that's been through both war and a wet winter. When you step outside into the crisp evening, the fresh air almost stings your lungs, and for a fleeting moment, you think maybe you could smell nothing for a week and be grateful. But you know you'll be back tomorrow, nose ready, or at least present, for whatever comes next. Because in this workshop, even the failures have their uses, and even the most perfect scent has a timer you can't see until it goes off. By now, you've learned to keep a cloth in your sleeve, ready to press over your nose when things get intense. Today, you'll need it. Your master stands in the doorway to the back room, holding something that looks like it escaped from a carnival, a long, curved leather mask with glass eye holes and a narrow beak. You recognize it instantly from grim illustrations, the plague doctor's mask. Only this one isn't meant for the street. This is his workshop version, lined with wool and stuffed with dried herbs, spices, and a few scented resins. He calls it the perfumer's shield. You're not sure if he's serious, but you're curious enough to try it. The moment you slip it on, your vision narrows, your breath warms the inside of the beak, and the scent of the stuffing floods your senses. Rosemary, lavender, mint, a heavy anchor of benzoin. For the first few minutes, it's almost pleasant, like walking inside a sachet. But then you realize the mask also traps everything else. If you get too close to a steaming vat of musk or a civet jar, the smell has nowhere to go. It swirls inside with you, growing denser with every breath. Your master chuckles as you fumble with a glass pipette, trying to measure bergamot oil without fogging up the lenses. "You'll get used to it," he says, "or you'll pass out. Either way, we'll know your limits." Historians still argue whether plague doctors' masks genuinely offered protection from disease or if they just gave people a comforting symbol to cling to. You suspect that in the perfume trade, they might be more hazard than help. Today's work involves bottling a batch of the heavy winter scent from yesterday's salvages. The base, labdanum, ambergris, and musk, throws a warm, thick cloud into the air. Inside your mask, it's like trying to sip soup through your lungs. You adjust the fit to let a sliver of outside air in, but that just pulls the musk in faster. You sneeze, and the sound bounces inside the beak like a drumbeat. To lighten the mood, one of the older apprentices tells you about a perfumer in Venice who supposedly wore a similar mask at all times, claiming it made him immune to fainting from strong blends. The story goes that he collapsed one summer after tripping over his own hem, the mask still on, scattering bottles like skittles. The master rolls his eyes but admits there's truth in the danger. Breathing concentrated fumes for too long can dull your senses, sometimes for days. Your main task is decanting the winter blend into tall glass flacons, each one as thin-walled as a soap bubble. You hold the funnel steady, the liquid gliding down in slow ribbons. Every so often, the scent shifts just enough to remind you how layered it is, first resin, then spice, then a shadow of citrus. But through the mask, each note seems to have a tail, a delayed echo that hangs in your head longer than it should. By midday, you've developed a rhythm: fill, cork, wipe, label. Your fingers move automatically, but your head feels stuffed with wool. The mask is warmer now, its inner herbs bruised by your breath. You start to notice a faint, sour undertone creeping in from the cloth itself, proof that even protective gear has a scent shelf life. Quirky tidbit for the day: some perfumers in this era actually perfumed their tools. Mixing paddles rubbed with lavender oil, funnels rinsed in rose water, not for sanitation, but so every step in the process contributed to the final blend. You glance at the paddle leaning in the corner, and wonder if yesterday's ambergris has left its own invisible contribution. Late in the afternoon, the master takes the mask back and hangs it on a peg near the window. You breathe open air again, and for a moment it feels like stepping outside after being indoors for days. The shop's normal haze, flowers, resins, faint animal notes, suddenly seems light compared to the intensity inside that leather beak. As you scrub the inside of the mask with a cloth dampened in vinegar and mint water, you can't help thinking it's a strange symbol for your trade. It's meant to protect you from the job, but in the wrong moment, it turns into a cage. Still, your master says it has its uses, on days when the fumes are especially brutal, or when a rival scent war drifts in from the street. By closing time, the mask is back on its peg, the flacons are lined up like obedient soldiers, and your head is clearing. But the memory of breathing through that scented tunnel lingers, proof that in this workshop, even protection comes with a price. By mid-morning the street outside sounds like pots and pans learning to sing. Hooves, hawkers, a cart with a wheel that screams at corners, your daily orchestra. Then you hear a new instrument, a hiss, a soft PFSSS, followed by a gust of heliotrope so loud it practically taps you on the shoulder. Your master freezes, nostrils flaring like a hunting dog who reads poetry. "They've started," he says, and you don't need to ask who. The rival shop across the lane has opened its shutters and, in a move neither subtle nor legal if anyone could be bothered to enforce it, is warming trays of scented alcohol by their threshold so the vapor unfurls over the cobbles. Within minutes their blend drifts through your door, candy violet, almond sweet, and just sharp enough to make your eyes feel glossy. Customers entering your shop taste it first. One lady actually pauses on your threshold, sighs their scent, and then blinks as your room gives her rose, labdanum, and a polite elbow of musk back. Smell becomes tug of war. Your master sets his jaw. "Open the upper vents," he says, "and bring the cedar box." You fetch the cedar shavings you've kept since Section 6 like a pocket knife for the air. He has you crumble a handful onto a small brazier near the door. The room brightens into dry, woody clarity. Next he lines the window ledge with saucers of citrus peels, bergamot, bitter orange, lemon, and tells you to warm them with a candle from beneath. It's sharper than burning incense, faster than boiling petals. The oils leap off the peels and race to the doorway, a counter-current. Your first quiet joke slots in with the wedges. If the air were bread, you could slice it now. Across the way, their boy tosses something onto a skillet. Sweet almond thickens, then a powdery iris steps out for applause. Your master mutters, "All hat, no horse," and flicks 2 drops of rosemary into your brazier to keep the line taut. And because this is a workshop that survives on both science and theater, he places a shallow copper bowl of rosewater right on the sill where sunlight can find it. In minutes, the room smells like a June rumor. People peer in. Mainstream fact to anchor your nose. Early modern cities really did use scent as signal and shield. During outbreaks, civic officials set aromatic bonfires, juniper, rosemary, sometimes frankincense, on street corners, believing good smoke would cleanse bad air. At festivals, courts splashed rosewater from fountains. Shopkeepers sprinkled floors with herbs to keep rooms fresh. Your lane may not host a king today, but it definitely hosts ambitions. Your master taps the ledger. We reply with presence, not panic. He assigns you to prepare street strength, trial vials, miniatures of your winter accord, labdanum, ambergris, a nit of tobacco leaf, spiked with a hair more lavender spike and a peel's worth of lemon. He wants carry notes that step into the street but don't stomp through the neighbor's parlor. You set up a relay with the older apprentice, fill, cork, wax tray. The glass kisses together like a congregation murmuring amen. To bait the air just outside the door, he shows you a trick he claims comes from an old Neapolitan. Soak linen strips in diluted perfume, wring them lightly, and hang them like pennants along the doorframes so drafts brush them on the way in. Whether it's Neapolitan or just your master's flair, it works. Every passerby earns a polite tap on the nose from your side. Historians still argue whether shops actually perfumed the street as deliberate competition or whether later writers made a sport of exaggerating it. The ledger in your hand suggests today's answer is yes, and vigorously. The rival escalates. A boy starts scattering iris powder onto the cobbles, then crushing it under his shoes. Your master squints, then smiles, a thin, foxish curve. All right, he says softly. Gloves. You fetch yesterday's balm, benzoin, clove, rosemary, a careful animal hush, and begin burnishing a pair to the point where the leather drinks and exhales at once. He has you place them near the entrance, fingers splayed as if trying to catch the day. People do stop. One man inhales, forgets his sentence, then remembers it louder. Quirky fringe tidbit floats in via gossip. A customer from the playhouse swears the rival once scented a basket of walnuts and rolled them along the street before a premiere so people would follow the trail to their counter. Your master calls that wasteful, then hands you a bowl of perfumed sawdust saved from trimming cedar racks. Not to roll, he says, to sweep. You scatter a modest pinch just inside your threshold and sweep slowly. The broom warms it, sends up a breath of woodland inside your door. It feels like cheating at housekeeping. You are fine with that. By midday the lane is a chessboard of aromas. Customers slip in and out with faces that say they're comparing suitors. You keep your voice low and slow, your jokes gentler than a hand on a railing, that your blends are more conversation than shouting, That his heliotrope could be heard from the bell tower. That if she wants a trail to the supper table, you promise one that doesn't elbow the soup. People laugh, then buy. Words have CA too. Between sales, your master reminds you that all this theater rests on craft. He has you thin your winter accord just a touch for the wig band clients. The heat of a playhouse or salon will amplify it anyway. He swaps rose absolute for a quieter geranium in a gown blend so it won't wrestle with the wearer's pomander. He even sniffs the outside air, squints, and adds 1 drop of mint to an order for the magistrate's study. Ink, leather, hot heads, he lists. Give him space to think. You begin to understand, outstinking is not the same as outthinking. The latter wins days you can breathe. There's a moment, short, sweet, dangerous, when the rival's cloud falters. Maybe their alcohol burner sputters, maybe their boy got bored, maybe a gust from the tanneries drifts up like a thrown glove. Whatever the reason, your lane suddenly tilts your way. A seamstress, a coachman, and the pearl lady from Section 9 all step through your door within a single minute. You move like a bell ringer, measure, fan, label, tie. The room hums. You also learn the limits. A cartload of hides rumbles by, and the street's baseline, cow, river, smoke, elbows everyone's colognes into the gutter. Your master doesn't fight it. He simply closes the window for 5 breaths, lights a twist of juniper on the brazier, sharp, clean, unshowy, and lets the room reset. Then he reopens everything. It's the olfactory version of turning a page. A last volley from across the lane, they roll out a tall glass jar and pour scented alcohol into it, stirring with a rod so the sunlight makes a glitter show. It's impressive, dangerously close to. Do not try this at home. Your master refuses the spectacle. Instead, he sends you out with a basket of sample ribbons lightly scented with your lemon lavender tobacco accord. You offer them with both hands, voice soft as felt. A thank you from our shop! Half the ribbons vanish in 10 minutes, and the rest flutter from sleeves up the street like little banners of allegiance. Marketing that doesn't stain the cobbles, imagine. You close later than usual. The rival shudders with a theatrical snap. Your master only lowers the bar, then stands a moment in the doorway, tasting the evening. We don't need to drown them, he says finally. We only need to be the last thing people remember when the door closes. He looks pleased, but not triumphant, more like someone who's learned a neighbor's favorite card trick and is already designing a kinder one. Before you bank the brazier, you tuck away the cedar box and the linen pennants, your new kit for small wars. You make a mental note, keep citrus peels handy, keep mint for tempers and magistrates, and never underestimate sawdust. Historians still argue whether that legendary 4 thieves vinegar really dates to a 17th century plague in Marseille or blossomed later as marketing, but standing here with vinegar-washed funnels and herb smoke thinning the day, you believe 2 things can be true at once. People buy protection, and they buy a story. Today you sold both, carefully. On your way out, you glance at the beaked mask from Section 11 hanging like a quiet moon by the window. You don't need it tonight. The street is tired, the air is cooler, and your own clothes carry just enough of your blend to walk you home like a friendly shadow. Second gentle joke as you lock up, you consider bowing to your own CA. Third, softer still, you decide against tipping yourself. The lane exhales. You do too. Tomorrow someone will start the hissing again, and you will answer. Not with noise, but with notes that know where to stand. The workshop feels almost peaceful this morning, but your master wastes no time reminding you that this calm will not last. Bottling day, he says, pointing toward a long table set with neat rows of empty glass flacons, each one narrow-necked, clear as ice, and fragile enough to make you nervous just looking at them. These are destined for a wealthy client's personal cabinet, and the order is so large that by the time you finish, your skin will smell like the blend for a week. The fragrance is one of the shop's proudest, an accord of ambergris, bergamot, and a silken layering of rose and orris, anchored by a soft undercurrent of musk. You've smelled it before in concentrated form, but here, as the blend sits in a large copper vessel, it rises in slow, steady clouds. It's the sort of scent that insists on being noticed without raising its voice. You set up the funnel and start pouring. The liquid slides down like pale gold, catching candlelight in ripples. You cork each flagon with care, sealing the stopper with a thin rim of wax to keep the fragrance from slipping away. But no matter how careful you are, a drop always seems to cling to the lip of the funnel, to your gloves, to your fingers. It's impossible to keep your skin entirely out of it, and soon the pads of your fingers are wearing the perfume like an invisible glove. Mainstream fact: in the 17th century, glass bottles for perfume were as much status objects as the scents themselves. Venice and Bohemia produced some of the most prized glassware, often so delicate that the container alone could cost more than a servant's yearly wage. Some patrons would commission bottles to match their furnishings or clothing, meaning you might find an entire dressing table staged as much for visual theater as for fragrance. The table slowly fills with finished flacons, their pale contents refracting the workshop's dim light. The repetitive work lulls you into a kind of trance. Pour, cork, seal, wipe, label. You find yourself listening to the liquid's sound, the faint glug as it displaces air, the almost imperceptible sigh when the stopper seals. If it weren't for the scent thickening in your lungs, you might even call it meditative. Halfway through, the older apprentice wanders by and jokes that you'll smell this in your dreams tonight. You reply that you'll probably smell it in his dreams, too. That's your first joke quota filled for the section, and it earns a grin before he disappears toward the back room. Inevitably, the air grows heavy. What started as a pleasant floral amber turns cloying as it layers on itself in the enclosed room. You crack the door for a breath of the city's not-so-fresh air, horse dung, damp stone, bread baking somewhere down the street, and the contrast is startling. For a moment, you actually appreciate the chaos outside. Then you close the door before too much dust finds its way in. By mid-afternoon, your hands are perfumed past the point of washing. The oils have sunk into your skin, clinging even after wiping with vinegar. Every motion sends up a faint ghost of the blend, so that you smell it when you pick up a pen, touch your apron, even push hair out of your eyes. You imagine the wealthy patron opening a flagon weeks from now and finding a trace of you still inside. Quirky tidbit: some perfumers in this era believed that a scent bonded differently if it was handled by someone in good health and a calm mood. Superstition? Likely. But you've noticed the master always works on the most delicate blends himself after lunch, when the morning's bustle has quieted and he's in no hurry. Today, however, he trusts you with all of it, either because he believes in you, or because the order is so large he has no choice. As the last few bottles are filled, the light outside dims into the warm shadow of late afternoon. You begin arranging them in padded crates, lining each with wool cloth to prevent the glass from rattling. The master steps in to inspect your work, running a long finger along a cork seal and nodding in approval. "They'll arrive intact," he says, "and they'll remember us every time they open one." Your second joke of the day comes when he reminds you to label each crate with the client's name. "I'll just write smells expensive," you suggest. He raises an eyebrow but doesn't entirely forbid it. The third joke arrives silently, in your own head, as you picture all these flacons sitting on a shelf in some echoing dressing room, the patron dabbing them on before meals and probably forgetting half the ingredients. You wonder what they'd say if they knew the blend passed through your hands hundreds of times in one day. By the time you set down the funnel for the last time, your back aches from leaning over the table, your eyes blur from reading fine script, and your head is wrapped in a gauzy film of scent. Stepping into the cooler front room feels like walking out of a steam bath into open air, though even there, the blend has followed you. As you bank the fire and stack the empty crates against the wall, you catch your reflection in the darkened window. Your hair is mussed, your apron dusted with wax shavings, your fingers faintly shining from oil. You smell like 100 flacons lined up in neat rows, and you know this is one of those days where the workshop will cling to you all the way home. You wake with the scent of yesterday still on your skin, faint but insistent, as if the bottling room decided to rent space in your dreams. By the time you reach the workshop, you already know you're carrying some of it with you. The master doesn't comment, but the older apprentice smirks. He knows that look of someone who's been worn by a blend overnight. Today's task is not glamorous, though it sounds like bliss, fresh air. Not actually going outside for the day, don't be absurd, but managing the workshop's air after a week of non-stop production. The problem is that every hour in here leaves a residue in your head, like perfume ghosts. They stack and stack until you can't tell whether the musk you smell is in the room or in your own hair. By late morning, you're finding excuses to crack the shutters just a finger width. The city's smells roll in: wet cobblestone, horse manure, a hint of frying onions from the tavern down the lane. It's rough, but it's real. You take a long breath and think you could live on this. Then, inevitably, the work drags you back. The master assigns you to blend a simple cologne for a sailor newly returned from months at sea. He asked for something like fresh air, the master says, with a look that suggests fresh air in the 17th century is a relative concept. You choose bergamot for brightness, rosemary for lift, and a thread of juniper to mimic that cold, sharp edge of wind off the water. Then you anchor it with a hint of oak moss and vetiver so it doesn't vanish the moment he steps outside. When you hand it to him later, he inhales and smiles. Whether it smells like the sea or just not like the harbor, he's happy. Mainstream fact: cologne, as a lighter, citrus-heavy perfume style, rose to fame in the 18th century, but its roots stretch earlier, often as refreshing herbal waters sold by apothecaries. In the 1600s, these lighter scents were considered not just pleasant but medicinal, something to cool the head and revive spirits. The afternoon drags in a quieter way. You find yourself staring at the shop shelves and imagining each scent as a place. Ambergris like a sun-warmed cliff, civet like a shadowed stable, lavender like a hillside buzzing with bees. The problem is, all of them have been crammed into one room for so long that the air feels stale even when the notes are lovely on their own. You slip outside under the pretense of fetching more rosemary sprigs. The wind is brisk, tugging at your sleeves, and it's the first time in days that you've felt entirely awake. For a moment, you imagine walking until the smell of the shop is just a memory. But your master's voice calls you back. There's a crate to unpack, more herbs to dry, more blends to start. By evening, you're restless. Even the other apprentices admit the workshop feels heavier than usual. One of them swears he can't smell the difference between rose and orange blossom anymore, which in this trade is a dangerous confession. The master decides on a clearing burn, a small brazier filled with juniper, bay leaves, and rosemary, meant to cleanse the air before tomorrow. The smoke curls upward, threading itself through rafters, jars, and cloth. For a few blessed minutes, the perfume ghosts loosen their grip. Your first joke comes when you tell the others the smoke smells like the kitchen after someone burns the roast on purpose. The second is quieter, muttered as you watch the last curls drift upward. There they go, the last of my headaches. The third, you keep to yourself as you close the shutters. You wonder if the shop will notice if you slip one of the rosemary sachets into your coat pocket tonight. When you finally step into the street, the air hits you like a cool cloth. It's not clean by any modern standard, there's still horse dung, coal smoke, and the faint tang of the river, but it's moving air, alive and shifting. For the first time in days, your lungs don't feel like they're sipping from a still room. You walk home slowly, just to make it last. And in the back of your mind, you already know, tomorrow, the workshop will be waiting with its heavy bouquet, and you'll step back inside because this is what you do. But tonight you get to breathe. By the end of the week, your head feels like it's wearing a heavy velvet curtain, the kind that muffles sound and swallows light. You push through the shop door, and the air inside rises to greet you like a perfumed tide. Rose and musk, civet and ambergris, bergamot flickers trying to stay afloat on a deep, resinous sea. You tell yourself you can handle one more day. Your nose, meanwhile, files for early retirement and leaves no forwarding address. The master has planned a grand push, 3 large orders to finish, 2 rescues to coax back from the edge, and a street strength demonstration in the afternoon to keep the rival shop honest. He says it with satisfaction, but you hear a low drum. Today your senses will be wrung like laundry. The stills are already warm, copper bellies glinting. The enfleurage frames hold jasmines that have started to sigh into the fat. The bottling bench looks like a glass army standing at attention. You tie on your apron and feel the familiar resignation of a soldier who knows which hill he's about to climb. You begin with the jasmine fat, scrape, replace, smooth, your fingers leaving soft trenches as you press fresh blossoms into place. The smell is lush, honeyed, flesh warm. On any other day, you'd call it beautiful. Today, it's the first heavy book added to a stack on your chest. A drop of labdanum slips from your wrist to the tray and blooms in the warmth. You wipe it quickly, but the note clings to the inside of your nose like a stubborn guest. Next, you tend the still that the master insists is just shy of roaring. Steam rises, twines, drifts, your forehead beads with perfumed condensation. He has you at a spoon of tinctured musk to a batch that would have been lovely without it. But lovely doesn't win the street. Lovely doesn't outlast a banquet, a brazier, a winter cloak, a week between washings. So in it goes, and the room lowers its voice another octave. By mid-morning the bottling begins. Ambergris lace blend, the one from section 13 that already lives under your skin. You pour, you cork, you wax, and the air thickens until every breath tastes faintly of warmed honey and old leather. The older apprentice leans over and says, "Breathe through your mouth." You try. Congratulations, now your tongue can smell, too. First joke of the day arrives like a survival instinct. You murmur that your taste buds deserve hazard pay. He laughs, then sneezes, an accord of human frailty in B minor. The master brings out the plague pomander from section 8, rotates it like a small planet, and says, not entirely ironically, that you should keep it on the bench. You obey, cracking it open when the air feels like it's sitting on your chest. Spiced vinegar and herbs cut a small window through the fog. You peer out of that window, grateful, then return to the weather of the day. Mainstream fact to anchor your wobbling brain. In the later 1600s, perfumers sold pastilles de center, pressed, scented pellets you burned to cleanse rooms. You can practically see them now, tiny comets of benzoic smoke trailing through a parlor while the city's gutters argue outside. A customer arrives flushed with urgency and coin. She wants a scent that will survive a wedding mass, a carriage ride, and an evening of dancing in a room where candles sweat and wigs molt. The master mixes with theatrical calm, but his eyes flick to you, add weight. You deepen the base with benzoin and a thread of tobacco leaf. The blend stands its ground. She presses your hands when she pays. Now your gloves carry her future evening. You wonder, with a strange mixture of pride and fatigue, whether the vows will smell like ambergris if anyone leans close enough. The hours bulge and shrug. The rival's heliotrope hisses in at the edges. You counter with warmed citrus peels and a discreet cedar smoke like you learned in section 12. You feel the workshop echo itself, every trick, every fixative, every superstition, until the room is a museum of your week. Historians still argue whether chronic exposure to strong aromatics left perfumers half anosmic by middle age or merely trained their noses into strange new strengths. All you know is that your sense of outside air has become a memory you access like an old song. Quirky tidbit bubbles up from the older apprentice as you both decant a stubborn floral. He claims a confectioner down the lane sometimes buys a whisper of ambergris to flavor chocolate for his richest patrons. You balk, then realize you've already put whale legend into gloves, gowns, and bed hangings. Why not into dessert? The thought makes your stomach feel complicated. Second joke escapes anyway. At least if the cake falls, the smell will rise. By late afternoon, your head is a crowded harbor, notes docking, departing, colliding. The beaked mask from Section 11 hangs near the window like an unhelpful saint. For a wild moment you consider wearing it again, then remember what it does to trapped musk. You press the vinegar cloth to your face instead and count backward from 10. At 7, a fresh wave of civet, thinned, yes, but undeniable, enters the room from a batch you didn't see started. You sway. The bench sways with you. The master's hand lands on your shoulder, steady as a chair back. Breathe, he says, through something that isn't your panic. The final pour is a monster, a winter accord meant for the lining of a brocade coat. You lift the copper vessel and feel your arms complain. The stream finds the funnel like a trained animal, and for a moment, all is quiet. No street, no rival, no chatter, just liquid and light and your own pulse. Then a tiny slip, a cold lick on your wrist, and the coat's future colonizes your skin. You wipe it away, but the ghost remains. Third joke, muttered so low it's almost a prayer. If I fall in the river on the way home, they'll think the river got fancy. The master calls the day at last. Candles pinch, shutters fold, the brazier settles into a red-eyed yawn. You untie your apron and your hands rise on their own to your face, as if you could scrape the air away. You step to the door, and the threshold becomes a cliff edge. Then you do what you should have done hours ago. You fall forward into the street. Outside is not freshness and lilies. It's horses negotiating dinner, damp stones speaking in mineral syllables, smoke taking the long road upward. But it's moving air. It's space. The workshop peels off you by degrees, like a too-tight glove, but it doesn't let go entirely. You walk, and people glance back, some impressed, some puzzled, one small dog very confused, as if a mobile apothecary has decided to take up strolling. You reach the corner, steady your feet, and hear yourself promise, softly then louder, that you won't go back tomorrow. Maybe not the next day either. Maybe never. And yet you know how mornings work in this century. Orders arrive. Coins clink. Gloves need balm. Someone wants a trail that outlasts their reputation. But tonight, at this hour, your vow is bright and simple. You will unfurl where the air belongs to no one, and you will not willingly breathe flavored weather again. Not until your lungs forgive you. Not until the fan hums and the room goes dim, and the day's perfumes slide back into the bottles where they belong. So now, let the workshop recede the way candle smoke thins as it climbs, slowly, lazily, leaving only a soft trace you can't quite catch. Picture the shelves closing their glass eyes, the copper stills cooling by degrees, their heat drifting upward like a quiet sigh. Imagine the last rose petal sinking into its tray and deciding, finally, to sleep. The street outside settles as well, hooves fewer, voices lower, the city tucking itself in under a blanket of chimney breath. Your shoulders loosen. The air you're breathing becomes wider, softer, easier. Each inhale is just air, plain, kind, unperfumed. Let it fill you without effort, and let it go without any hurry. The noise of the day fades to a distant hallway murmur. No rival shop. No ledger. No paddles, no funnels, no jars with complicated histories. Just a room the size of your breath, dim and quiet, with a fan humming a friendly line in the corner. If a few notes still hover, amber at the edge of memory, a leaf of rosemary hiding in your sleeve, let them pass like neighbors on an evening walk. They are not your job anymore. They are simply small travelers on a long road. You can wish them well and watch them go. The floor under you is steady. The door is closed. The night has all the time it needs. Your eyes grow heavy the way shutters drift down at last light. Thoughts arrive softer, rounder, less interested in being solved. Even the week's vows loosen into something simpler. Rest now, decide later. The bed is cool, the pillow familiar, and the dark is kind. The world will keep its sense to itself for a while, and you can keep this quiet, unadorned breath, one easy tide at a time, until sleep steps in and takes your hand. Sweet dreams.